Welcome. This is Colleen Lautef from the Sherburne Public Library, and we are introducing a new series called SPL Book Talks. This first one today is we're going to be discussing the book Outlander, and actually the series we'll probably be discussing too. With me, I have Marie Morin, who is one of our pages, or one of our employees at the library, and Donna Morin is actually her mother, but also she's an English teacher and a lover of Outlander.
And didn't you work at the library a while ago, Mom?
That was a while ago.
Yeah.
Like a long time ago.
Former librarian. Okay, so we're all librarians. That's wonderful. So I don't know if any of you have read Outlander. I mean, we have, and we adore it. So we thought we would we just talk about it for a while. And you can appreciate your love for that too. So, Donna, what do you want to start with? I know you're our English teacher. You can get us started.
Well, first of all, I just adore this book. I can't even, when it was first introduced to me by a fellow English teacher, she said, "You're going to love this, and I guarantee it." I said, okay. So I borrowed her copy, and I think it was maybe 48 hours that I had pretty much flown through that book.
Dude,
Wow.
this book is over 600 pages, and it only took you 48 hours? I mean, I know you read like a demon, but like...
It was that good, though. And I
like,
admit, it was something I skimmed. I didn't read it heavily because I went back and read it again, and the next time I read it, it took me longer.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
But it's the kind of book that you can just sort of eat.
Yeah.
Just munch through it.
Yeah, and I feel like you can read it over and over and get things more and more out of it each time. It's like you said, you kind of skim through it. Because the first time you read it, you're thinking, oh, I want to get to the good parts. I want to get to the part where she finally gets to Scotland and all of that,
Right.
and finally meets Jamie and all of that. I know I was anxious for that. So the first few chapters, I was like, when are we going to get to, time travel and do all that?
Mm-hmm.
What I did like about the opening, though, is that she sets the stage for us beautifully.
Yeah.
Her use of language and pictures.
Yeah.
I know we were just talking about this before we started. Her use of imagery and the way she paints the pictures. And it's not just that I can see it in my head.
Absolutely.
I can smell it. I can taste it.
Yes.
I all of those things. I can touch it. I know what that means and what that feels like.
Yes.
And she's done a tremendous job of sort of taking you to World War II, taking you to Scotland, taking you eventually back to the Americas, back to, when the colonialism was going on. And
I think that's part of the fun, is it's such a journey. It's such an epic story, and it obviously encompasses, spoiler alert, many years. And so it becomes this huge world of characters, and they're so woven in so nicely. And I think, Marie, you were talking about how historically accurate she is with everything, which I find fascinating too.
Yeah, well, and some of you who have seen other stuff that I have put out there on the Sherburne Library page, and also for the Shenango County Historical Society, I'm a history major. Some of you who have seen that know that. So reading historical fiction is one of my favorite pastimes. I read almost exclusively kind of historical fiction because it's something that just grabs my attention and I can easily just get through because I love that sort of thing. So when I started Outlander, and Colleen is the one who kept telling me over and over, you need to read these books. You need to read these books. You would think it would have been my mom, but she lets me read whatever I'm going to read. But Colleen
won't listen to her.
So. Kept saying to me, you need to read these books. You would love them. They take place in Scotland. They're historical. They're everything I feel like you look for in a book. And she was totally right. It's so true. I mean, this has become one of my favorite books. And I reread this book a lot because I love the story and the characters, and also the historical portrayal of the Glorious Revolution in Scotland in the 1700s. Like the way that Diana Gabaldon is able to achieve the, like my mom said, you can smell it, you can taste it. I remember when I was reading the portion of the book where you sort of get closer to the actual revolution itself, and I think it might actually be in the second book. I haven't read these books in a while, but where they're actually like fighting for Scotland, you can smell the gunpowder. You can feel the desperation of the Scots who are just trying to get away from their oppressor, England. Like, that's not to go on a rant about England oppressing people, but so it's just like, it's so wonderful how much Diana Gabaldon puts into researching for her books too. And not just about Scotland, but she, for the next book, again, spoiler, but they go to France. And the amount of research that she did about geography in France is incredible. I've watched some interviews with her, and I've watched other things that she's put out there about this sort of thing. And it's incredible to me, the amount of work that goes into these books to make them as historically accurate as possible. I've got a visitor.
I see that.
Buddy.
And I know that there's lots of books out there that are good at authors who are good descriptors. They know how to describe a beautiful scenery or a beautiful landscape or some moment. But I love the way that Diana does it, because I feel like it's just woven into what's already there. So you're not reading a separate paragraph going on and on about the beauty of the leaves or the beauty of the highlands or something. It's just woven into the language and the words that she's already using. So you, like you said, you feel like you're there, you can taste it, you can smell it, you can feel it. I mean, she really puts you in that place. So I just always, that's what really drew me in after, the story is great, but that just really drew me in, the feeling that I was there, and I'm there in history while these things like Culloden's happening and all of these other things. It was just like, this is amazing. So yeah, and I was drawn. I got to it from another librarian who used to work here at the library. She was a children's librarian many years ago when I was still just a page here, not a page, a staff member, clerk, whatever you want to call it. But anyway, she said, "Oh, Colleen, you love time travel and you love historical fiction. Have you read these books?" I'm like, "No, I don't think I know those." And she said, "You must read them." And so I did. And then I was hooked, like you said, just hooked. You can't put them down. And you can't wait for the next one every time.
Yes. And that's always the hard part, is waiting. Well, was waiting for the next one.
And they've gotten bigger. This one's 600 pages, but the next few are like 800 or something like that. They're a lot.
But they're very absorbing, which is nice.
Yes.
I mean, I'll look up and be like, "Oh, it's been 3 hours."
Yeah. Easy to get lost in her little world, which I love.
And she does it beautifully. Her characters are multi-dimensional, and the same way that she's weaving all of her scenery and stuff in, she's weaving in those little important bits and pieces about them that you want to know. Yeah. And you didn't know you wanted to know it until you knew it.
Right.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yeah.
When I teach creative writing, I try to explain to the kids, this is a really important piece of this. Don't just describe and then go on and talk.
Mm-hmm.
Take all of that, and it is a difficult skill. Take all of that and put it together so that we can see the landscape and we can hear someone's voice, and then remembering about, internal and external voices. You want to hear what they're thinking, but you also want to know what they're saying. And that's a tricky thing to do without being excessive or boring.
Right.
She is neither.
Yeah, I agree.
So and the character depth is, and across the entire series, they're multidimensional, and she peels back these layers for you of things that have happened, things that are part of their life. And with Claire, who's the traveler, we get to see all sorts of things, making connections between who she is in the beginning and then after she travels, how that fits into who she needs to be in that particular culture.
Yeah.
But she never completely conforms. I mean,
No.
she's herself, but she doesn't turn into one of those women. She keeps a lot of her own
That's
ideas.
one of the things that I really love about the way that Diana Gabaldon writes in general, is she's still always Claire. Like, no matter where she goes, what time period she's in, she's still always Claire. Some time travel books, you feel like people conform a little bit too quickly to the time period, and it's just like they wouldn't really do that. And it's with Claire, it's so different. And also the other thing about this is like the way Diana Gabaldon writes feminist books without you sort of realizing it. It sort of sneaks up on you, because the way often that some people can read these books is like, you know, it's Scotland in the 1700s. Of course, the men are going to be ridiculously misogynistic. Like, of course, that's how it's going to happen. But Diana Gabaldon writes Claire to be the foil of that, and like she challenges it through the whole book, and that helps Jamie to grow, and it helps the other men around her to grow, and it also helps the women to feel more comfortable in how they operate, and like to sort of branch off and start that, you know, gender revolution. And she also doesn't just do it with women. She does it, she has gay characters in the books, she has people of color in these books. And I mean, these books were written in the 90s, so like in that regard it's a little bit ahead of its time, even though it's not as modern as like things we might want to see like today and read in our, like, you know, everyday lives. But like it's still ahead of its time for when it was written, and like talking about all of the topics that it talks about, and not even just gender and race and sexuality. It also talks about like other aspects of life that we don't like to think about, like sexual assault and rape. And I really think that Diana Gabaldon does a really good job in these books addressing those topics without being gratuitous about it, like, for example, Game of Thrones is sometimes. So it's one of the things I really, really love about the way that Diana Gabaldon writes.
Right. And she does it like it's not, she's not trying to push an issue, you know, pushing her agenda on it. She's just
like,
saying, this, you must believe this. She's just kind of saying this is the way it was, but Claire's always outside trying to, you know, move things forward a little, even though she realizes in the 1700s that life is what it is and she can't do a lot to change it, but she does make her little, you know, inroads here and there, and obviously makes a big difference in Jamie's life. I mean, and some of the other men around them. Murtaugh, you know, I think.
Murtaugh.
One of my favorites. Yeah, I love him. So, what else?
I was thinking of Lord John.
Oh.
When
John
we're talking
Gray,
about,
that's sort of who I was talking about. I love John Gray. He's one of my favorite characters in the whole series. He doesn't go until the second book, but I love that man.
What'd you say, Donna?
And yet kind of a villain.
In some ways, yeah.
In some ways.
In the beginning especially. Yeah. You know, as the series goes on, he and Jamie really, you know, become...
That's where we peel off the layers that I was talking about. I was like, oh.
Right.
But was he ever really a villain?
And I think that's a good question, and we may never know.
I think he was doing his job at the beginning.
Yes, I do too.
But like even then, he made exceptions for Jamie. He was always like doing, in my opinion, the right by Jamie, and it just like John Gray.
Can we talk about Jamie for a minute?
Yes, please. Let's talk about Jamie.
That was the other thing my friend told me when she handed it to me. She said, "You're going to love this. It's got all sorts of elements of different things, and when you meet Jamie Fraser, you can thank me."
Yes, absolutely.
He has set the bar too high.
He has. I mean, to me, he is the perfect man. I mean, just isn't he what every woman wants? Yeah. I mean.
Well, and I love that about Jamie, but he's also flawed. Like, he's so wonderful. Flawed. Is like, it's perfect. Like, the way that Diana Gabaldon writes her novels, it's just all of the characters are like, the essence of something, but they still are flawed in people.
Oh yeah, very human people. Yeah, Jamie, I couldn't wait for us to meet Jamie because I knew that was going to happen. And the other thing I thought was interesting is when I first started reading, I thought I'd been reading a lot of, at the time I was reading a lot of those Highlander romance things, and some time travel stuff, and it's all pretty much the same and the same formula for all of those kinds of things. So when I started reading this, I was thinking, oh, this is the same kind of thing probably, and I start reading it, and of course I realize it's not, and I couldn't wait to get to Jamie, because I knew he was going to be great, or something about something that they had told me about it. And then, of course, after you meet him, you just really do fall in love with him.
You really do. He's soft.
Yeah.
But he's tough, but he's masculine, but he's not.
Right.
Like toxically so.
Right. He's definitely.
And it's interesting too, because of course the physical description of him is just but his mental disposition toward even thinking about the things that Claire kind of brings with her. He's not so hard-minded that he's not going to think about it.
Yeah.
And she's subtle about some of it. It's just what she does, and she just does it, and he just says, "Oh, okay." And that's one of his wonderful qualities to me, besides red hair and big muscles,
right.
that I love about him. He just accepts. He's just very accepting of her, and of course he's completely and totally in love with her. Who doesn't want that?
Right.
It reminds me of one of my favorite sort of points in Outlander that sort of almost feels like a turning point in, not a turning point in their relationship, but something that's just so much strengthened it, when like Claire was being accused of being a witch, and she like was on trial and all of that stuff, and the moment where and I'm referencing the TV show a little bit right now too, because it's so burned in my brain, this scene, because
very visual.
I mean the way that Sam Heughan plays Jamie is, they could not have found a better Jamie, in my opinion.
I know.
He just like bursts in and is like, I am bound to protect this woman. I love this woman. You are not going to keep whipping her. And then they like go and they talk about it. And he's like, I trust you. I love you, but I just need to know, like, are you a witch?
Are you really a witch?
The pox.
Yeah, the scar
pox
for her. Yeah.
Right. And
right.
and then she told him like everything, and he was like, it doesn't make sense to me, but I believe you, and I just like, I'm accepting and I'm supporting you, and I'm just like, Jamie,
I know,
like, oh my god,
that unconditional love that he has for her, no matter what. It's just amazing to me. But, what else?
Well, the concept itself of time travel, like you said earlier, it can be kind of always the same. They do this, this happens, they live happily ever after.
Right.
And the big twist is, do they come back or do they stay?
Right.
And do they try to bring someone back, or do they part with them and somehow meet someone very similar to them? That's always, to me, that's always like, really?
Yeah, right.
Maybe it's reincarnation. And I appreciate those books for what they do, but this takes a very different approach to this concept of time travel, and how it sneaks up on her and yet makes sense.
And you were just talking about how sometimes that person goes back and tries to find like a similar person or whatever. The other thing that's so interesting to me about this book is the two like men in Claire's life are complete opposites of each other. Opposites of each other.
Yeah.
And it's so fascinating to me that Diana Gabaldon wrote that way, because she could have made it that, the easy way, like Claire has a type, but like she did not do that. No. Frank and Jamie could not be more different from each other. So
I often wonder what if she hadn't gone back in time, what would her relationship with Frank have been? Would they have stayed together? Would
Right.
they have not? I mean, I don't know the answer, but
I feel like they would have ended up where they ended up anyway.
I kind of think so too. It may have just evolved and taken a different path, but I think that, you know, their true colors, so to speak, will come through in the end.
Right.
Or but then again, you know, it's hard to know because, you know, Frank is in a tough situation. He loves this woman. They get married and then she disappears. And he thinks she's gone and died. So he has to think forward in his life. So maybe if that hadn't have happened, maybe it would have been different. I don't know. Obviously, I wanted her to be with Jamie because he's just, you know, like I said before, the perfect man. But I often do now go back and think about it because of all the things that happen in the, you know, as you go through the series. It just makes you wonder what would have happened if this had never happened for her.
Yeah.
It's just curious.
Well, and the timelines that Diana Gabaldon establishes too are like the way that she just weaves all of the timelines together and things come back around that you thought you were going to have, like, you could forget about from the first book, and like things just keep coming back around and around, and like it's such a cool concept because besides just the historical research that Diana Gabaldon did, she did a lot with like time travel science and physics and stuff like that too in order to tell her story. Even though the way that Claire time travels isn't scientific, she still sort of includes that in, like the butterfly effect and other like theories. Like, I'm not a scientist by any means, but other theories like that. And it's so cool that she does that, because a lot of time travel books, at least that I've read, there's no consequences really for going back in time. Unless you're watching Doctor Who, there's not a whole lot of consequences. And Doctor Who is its whole own thing. Like, that's a whole different thing. But it's very cool to see the way that she does that. And like you said earlier, like the world building in this series is so huge sometimes that it's hard to remember who's still alive and who isn't at some points.
Right.
Because it spans so many years.
Yeah.
And it's just
then when she brings somebody back in a couple books later, I'm like, wait a minute, who was this person?
Right.
I have to kind of rethink or go back and look because I get confused or lost because it's so big. It's such a big world.
Yeah.
But she keeps track of it because I've read some series where the inconsistencies drive me nuts because the author apparently either doesn't have an editor or somebody keeping track of these things. She's not keeping track of them. And so you get this thing where it's like, oh, this guy's eyes were blue originally and now they're green. Wait a minute.
Wait.
But you're never going to find that in hers because she is so detail oriented. And she must have I can't imagine, she must have a wall or something or a file that just
Post-it notes.
I know. I pictured this giant wall of like
with all the string.
This family, these people. I don't know. In my mind, that's what she does. I'm sure she has some system that works really great for her. But I'm just so impressed by that because there are so many authors that don't put that much thought and detail into it, and she does, and it just really makes a difference because we as fans remember those things. We remember details like that, and if authors don't remember them too, then it's so
it ruins it.
Yeah,
I agree.
I also think she makes the time travel the way that they do it. I know it's not real science, but you feel like she put enough thought and scientific thought into it that it's believable. Like, oh, this could happen, I guess, you know. I mean, it's a little stretch, but I still think it could.
I mean, yes. What did you say, Mom?
Maybe it could.
Well,
I gotta get to Scotland so I can try it out.
It depends on what you believe, because also the way she tells it, like with the science on top of like the druidic customs in like Scotland, depending on what you believe, you could very like easily believe that this could be true.
I know.
And
It's
like
very interesting.
it's so cool how she involves like the ancient traditions, the ancient Celtic traditions of Scotland too, and a lot of this.
Yeah.
Like she could just leave it out because at that point, like, well, she can't really leave it out, but at that point it's like, okay, we're in the 1700s, we don't really do this stuff anymore, except that people still in like the Highlands of Scotland, they still believe all of this stuff.
Right.
So, and it's just so cool. And I'm fascinated with witchcraft and that sort of thing anyway. The way that she includes that sort of stuff, it makes it like you could easily believe in it.
Yeah.
Well, and often what was considered magic is just magic until it becomes science.
That's
right.
Yep. And Claire is one of those
find
things.
The underlying theorem of it, or
Yep.
Yeah.
you know, I mean,
Very true.
Galileo. Hello.
Well, and she does a really good job of making Claire that vessel, of like being the sort of mystic healer that she is, but she just knows what she's doing because she's been a medical field nurse for years and years. So like that's so cool that you talked about that, because it's sort of going back to the progress that she is bringing to the history of that period.
I mean, it fascinates me that she begins making penicillin or a crude form of penicillin because she knows how it's made.
Yeah.
And so she's able to save some lives because of that.
Yeah.
I just, and her whole science and being a doctor piece of it are fascinating to me, because everything she describes obviously is based in facts and reality, and yes, these herbs and these roots and these things can be used. They were used for things. I remember is it Ned who has like
he has
asthma or something?
Yeah.
And she has him smoke some kind of something,
I think
root,
it's like
weed. I don't remember what it was.
I'm not
Cherry maybe, something that would open. I mean, obviously we all know smoking is terrible for someone who has asthma, but it would open up his chest enough, his lungs enough, so that he could breathe better, and that was the whole point of it. So those kinds of things are just fascinating to me. I feel like I learned so much about history and the medical field, just basic herbal medicine and the beginnings of real medicine. Real, I don't know what you mean. You know what I mean? Modern medicine, that's a better word for it. But I just feel like this was like, I learned history, I learned, science. I mean, it was like,
and fell in love.
And I fell in love with Jamie, of course.
It's everything a book should be. It's educational without being boring, and there's great characters.
Yeah.
And you just, you can fall in love with Jamie. I've also fallen in love with Claire. Like, I love both of them, and it's just like all of the characters.
Yeah. Claire's such a strong woman. She's just she's such a role model in so many ways for women. That, I mean, she's, like you said, she's her own self. She always remains herself.
And it's interesting because she doesn't just show that in past time periods either. She does it in her own time period.
Right.
She becomes like the only, at least the way that Diana Gabaldon tells it, she's the only woman in a Harvard class full of medical students.
Which makes sense for that time period.
Right,
exactly. That she would be.
And the one black man who is in the class.
Right.
Like that whole dynamic between, and this isn't in the first book, this is later.
Right,
but
you find this out,
that whole dynamic is just like the intersectionality that Diana Gabaldon includes with like oppressed people like gathering together and like sharing the load is just like phenomenal in this book. And she does it more than just in Claire's like modern times of the 50s and 60s. She does it in the past too. Like it happens again. Later in one of the later books, it happens again. And it's just like
amazing.
Also, I love the unabashed way that Diana Gabaldon talks about slavery.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very real, very open, very true.
Yep.
Yep.
And honesty hurts when you're talking about
Yeah.
subjects like that.
Absolutely.
She's just pushes right ahead and talks about it because honestly, that's what you need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Talk about it. And you need to be articulate and honest about it. So
Right.
Well, and her characters deal so well with it too. Of course, Claire, coming from the time she is of course horrified by slavery, but Jamie is born in this time period, and he is also like horrified by slavery, like most people should be. And it's just like the way that she tells some of those stories about those, like Jamie's family owning slave plantation, is just like it really brings us back to Jamie is just a normal human being trying to deal with the problems of the past too. Like Jamie's got his own past. And it's just like, ooh. Ooh.
Yeah, Jamie's got his own past.
Right. Jamie's got his own demons. That's a whole other thing.
He sure does. Yeah, I think I went to the book to read it thinking it was just a love story. And I thought, yay, love story. Which I love, I'm all for romance. But once I started reading it, and we all know, it's so much more than that. It's an adventure. And that's also telling that, like, bookstores and libraries, I guess, even don't know where to categorize her books, because they're not really romances. I mean, there's tons of romance, but it's not just a romance. It's an adventure. It's an epic story. It's a historical, it's crazy.
Well, I give it a 5 out of 5.
That was my rating on Goodreads too. I gave it a 5 out of 5 when I was
Absolutely, I would. So it's definitely I think my favorite series that I've read. And she's definitely my favorite author, because she's such a good writer, and like all the things we've talked about, she's just so specific and interesting in the way she weaves things together. So, anything else we need to talk about?
Probably, but
I know we could go on and on. We could talk about every single character. We could go in depth in Jamie's past, like we were just talking about.
We could, but this almost feels like a good place to stop, because we sort of brought it back around.
Okay, so I think we'll wrap it up with that, and keep watch for more of this. We're hoping to do some more SPL Book Talks. If you've got ideas or other, feedback for us, we'd love to hear what you've got to say. So let us know. And thank you for watching. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for watching.